think anytime we hear a story about leadership, we look at it like it's common sense. But common sense is not common practice. And I think hearing the stories that these leaders provide give all of us a roadmap to being better at influencing other people.
I can't think of a better time to take advantage of the literally hundreds of years of experience that you will glean in a very succinct and practical way through the wonderful stories that are included in this book.
Each chapter in this book represents a different leader who is willing to share and impart their knowledge and wisdom to turn you into a leader.
The stories are inspiring and illustrative, and they offer insightful and practical advice from exceptional leaders who have achieved extraordinary accomplishments, transformations, and change.
I know that I've always found the most important thing I can do is watch other leaders. What makes them successful, and what can I emulate that might make me a better leader?
The personal stories of how individual leaders overcame the challenges that they were facing is going to be most helpful to people.
I think one of the things folks can get out of this book is learning from someone else's mistakes, right? I've learned a lot from my own mistakes along the way, and have been able to share some of that.
These are amazing people with incredible backgrounds offering their own lessons of experience to all of us.
The biggest takeaway from Lessons from Leaders is that there's a wide variety of leadership styles, and it's important that you find the best style for you and be genuine to yourself.
The more you understand how leadership contributes to goals and objectives of the organization, where you're going to be at helping everybody to participate and bring their best selves to work together.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's session for a discussion on leadership. We really appreciate that you are joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and get started with introductions just so that we can get started quickly. I know we're excited to have this conversation. So first is CEO.works founder Sandy Ogg, who has spent over 30 years working and learning with Fortune 500 executives around the world. His experience and success in human resources led him to develop Connecting Talent to Value, a methodology that helps organizations bend the value curve by getting the right people in the right jobs. Sandy's lessons from working with C-suite executives have been integrated into several books and papers on leadership and value creation, including the foreword he wrote for Lessons from Leaders. Welcome, Sandy.
Thank you, Susie. I'm really excited to be a part of this.
Next, we have Brett Williams, who is a retired U.S. Air Force Major General, Director of Operations, U.S. Cyber Command, F-15 fighter pilot, co-founder and Chief Operating Officer of IronNet Cybersecurity. He's an established keynote speaker and coach, as well as one of the leaders highlighted in Lessons from Leaders in his chapter, Leadership is Vague. Thank you so much for joining us today, Brett.
Thanks, Susie. It's great to be here with Sandy and I guess Sam as well. So thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you so much. And next we have Sam, the Executive Vice President of Thought Leadership and Training Transfer at the Center for Leadership Studies. He is the author of From Coach to Coach, The 4 Moments of Truth, and co-author of Lessons from Leaders. So welcome, Sam. Thank you for hosting Brett and Sandy with us today, and we look forward to getting started.
Well, I'll tell you, Susie, thank you and Eric and Thaneet very much for getting us to the point where we are connected here through technology with many people. I would also like to thank everyone that took time out of what I know are very busy schedules to join us. I will tell you, we're obviously here to talk about the book Lessons for Leaders and all of that sort of thing. But if anyone here, if you could hit Sandy Ogg's website, CEO.works.com, and check out some of the things that he and his team are doing with disruptive change. It is amazing. It is practical. It's implementable, and it's some of the best stuff that's going on in our industry, in my very humble opinion. So, Sandy, honored to have you here representing your team. And Brett Williams, despite your little slight there at the intro about just very honored to have you. And I would also say for people out there, if you really want an engaging speaker on cybersecurity that sort of matches up, I think it's really a multi-directional leadership approach to handling all that is cybersecurity threat. I would ask you to go to Brett's website. I believe it's the cyberspeaker.com. And let me get those commercials out of the way up front. But honored to have both of you. It's difficult as I look through kind of the trailer video, and I'm reminded of many of the interviews that I had the opportunity to do, Brett, with you and Sandy as well, and all of the other leaders that we had featured in the book. It was really difficult calling that work, to sit down and to ask, these very, very established leaders, like, so what is leadership to you? Where does it come from? Like, when was the first time you remembered like thinking about being a leader and having that sort of pressure? And I don't say this to everybody, Brett, so don't get a big head here, but I really thought when you said leadership is vague, which is the title of your chapter, boy, I thought that encapsulated a lot, and it's really where I'd like to start here, today. I think we all got a pretty good sense of what vagueness is, but if you could put any additional structure around that, what does that mean? How do you look at it, and how would what advice would you have for leaders today that are trying to work their way through all of that vagueness?
Yeah, sure, Sam. Thanks. And like I've told you before, in all seriousness, it was such an honor to be included in this book. When you look at the quality of people and the experience in there, it is really neat to be part of that and to be part of this discussion today. So I got to tell you, the roots of that quote go back to my son, Sean Michael. We're a bit of an Air Force family. My wife, Mary Ann's a retired Air Force officer. She served 20 years, and our daughter, Mickey, who's listening today, I got to give her a shout out. It's her birthday. She's a longtime Air Force kiddo, but our son, Sean, is a lot like his dad. He did not want a real job. And so he elected not to leave adolescence, and he became a fighter pilot as well. And so he's an F-16 pilot, currently transitioning from South Carolina out to New Mexico. But he was in ROTC, and I was getting ready to speak to a group of ROTC cadets. And so, of course, I called him up to get some advice on, what they would like to hear about leadership. And he goes, I really don't know. Leadership is vague. And so that pretty much set the tone for a lot of the discussions I've had on leadership. And, I think what that captures is that, one aspect is people really are not sure that they can define what a leader is. They can a lot of times define what success is. They can define some of the things a particular person did. But I think it's actually a pretty good way of capturing maybe the bigger picture that, that leadership is embodied in different ways in different leaders. And the things that might make me successful as a leader might be different for Sandy or different for you. And to really pin down, what is leadership, I think is difficult, although you can certainly find a lot of definitions, on the internet or wherever you want to go. I think at the end of the day, though, and actually reading all the stories in the book, helped me narrow down some things that I think leaders do, but maybe aren't necessarily the definition of leadership. And I think the theme you see through there is this ability to, to number one, to influence people, to get them to do things that they would not otherwise do without the influence of that leader. I think that's to me maybe the kind of the capstone way of defining that. And I think it's important to note that, whether you can look across history, even our recent history, that when I say influence people to do things, it's not always what we would consider to be the right thing, right? And I think that's important to recognize as well, that an effective leader can can drive an organization in a favorable way. And I think effective leadership can also drive an organization in a way that maybe is not best suited to the ultimate purposes. And so as you think about that, this leadership is vague. Everybody has their different definitions and their characteristics, but I think this ability to influence people to do things that they would not otherwise do kind of boils down to me maybe what the measure of effectiveness is, and then how you do that, how you influence people. There are a lot of different ways to do that. I'm sure we'll hit on a number of these this afternoon.
Yeah, I thought, if there are people asking me, like, what are, you talked to all these people, you interviewed them, you put this together with Marshall and Kathy McDermott, there's definitely strands of consistency. And there are also obviously, some really different approaches that people have, to achieve that success and effectiveness. And, I've mentioned, I think we even put it in the foreword, that this isn't the kind of book you necessarily pick up and just, start at page 1 and read through. I mean, you got to pick somebody that resonates with you. There's a wide diversity of people that we have there, from the standpoint of 8 men, 7 women, all types of different backgrounds, ethnicities, and also different paths that they have taken to success. But in taking a look, find a story that resonates with you, read that one. Go for that one first, and kind of skip around. And Sandy, to transition to you for a minute or two, I just I want to get this out there. I was a little bit upset how many times I've heard from various people that have read the book how much they loved the foreword, which is it's one page of the book, and you wrote it, and it was all about the foreword. The foreword, it just grabbed me. It just did this, it did that. But the first 8 words that you put out in the foreword are disruptive change, period. Daunting risks, period. Increasing complexity, period. Rampant uncertainty. So I remember reading that for the first time and thinking, wow, I might want to read something a little lighter, something, something that, this does not sound fun. But you've been embedded so much in so much change in so many different, as a CHRO of Unilever and various things, but also what you orchestrated at Blackstone and what you're doing with CEO.works now. What advice would you have, given that intro and given what Brett talked about in terms of leadership being vague? What advice would you have for people out there that are like, yeah, they're in the middle of it, whether they want to be or not? And I suppose the age-old thing, right? They can either lead, follow, or get out of the way. But what advice would you have, given your positioning and your experience there?
Thank you, Sam. First thing I'd like to say is it's a real privilege to be with both of you guys. I have the deepest respect for you, Sam, in terms of what you have done with the Center for Leadership Studies, you and your family, because that's an important part of me too, and also the person that you are. And Brett, when I read your background, it just sort of said, I'm not worthy. The service that you've provided to this country, and the person that you are, and the way that Sam and others talk about you, it's just it's an honor to be with both of you.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I would say, Sam, that when I'm watching what's going on in the world now, I've sort of become a missionary in a certain way, which is, if I were to encapsulate it, change hits, and we're watching it, unprecedented change landing, not the least of which is this pandemic that we're all dealing with. So change hits, and then value shifts. Money moves because money follows value, and people don't, because people are stuck in hierarchies and stuck in old ways of thinking and doing and all that kind of stuff. And if there was ever a time, and so you get this massive unclick where people get disconnected, and when they're disconnected from value or even disconnected from their values, it becomes a dignity issue. And so we've got this big dignity problem that's happening. And what we need is leaders. If there was ever a time that you needed leadership, it's to connect people back to value and back to their values. How do we do that? And so, I was reflecting a bit on Brett's definition that leadership is vague. And I think it's cool because my simple sort of definition of leadership is to take people elsewhere, and that implies just as Brett was outlining, it implies influencing because we're going to bring them with us. But then there's elsewhere, and elsewhere implies a choice. So as leaders, we have to make choices, and then we have to influence. And fortunately and unfortunately, we will be judged, because the judgment, when you accept that leadership responsibility, the judgment about the choice you made and the influence that you had. And we're watching this everywhere, right? Because people are judging, where did the leader take us? And is that an outcome that is connected to value and my values? And when I watch this massive unclick that's happening in our society, and I cried when I saw people crawling on the wall of the Capitol. I absolutely cried, and I wasn't crying because they were, sort of desecrating the Capitol. I was crying because, there's such a need for leadership now. And the more uncertainty and the more change and so forth, the more leadership is needed. And I think the book that you pulled together, Sam, with the different lessons and the way that you just articulated it, which is pick a spot. You don't have to read this thing from the back to the front or from the front to the back. Pick a spot, something that's interesting to you, dig in on it. And then, if we can all just provide a little bit of leadership based upon what's happening right now, let's do it.
Yeah, well, I tell you, and I don't want you getting a big head or anything, okay? Just but yeah, you pull words out that I think are common words that all of us understand, but the emphasis and the packaging of those words is a unique talent that you have. And as much as I'm involved in, dignity is at the forefront of what everybody needs to be doing right now in so very many different ways. Buy the book, don't buy the book, but you do not have an option really as a parent, as somebody in an organization, or you have to lead. And the reason that you have to lead, I think, or at least give it strong consideration, is that really nobody knows exactly what to do. Right? I mean, you kind of gave your distinction. I've always thought of it as the difference between leadership and management is management's what you do when you know what good looks like, right? You know what the end result is. You're going to take people from here and you're going to get them. You're going to help them, right? You're going to help get them there, right? And boy, leadership is what you do when you really don't have any idea, but you still have to move. And I really think about, the stories in the book, Alan Mulally, when he took over at Ford, he really was somebody that came in to a situation that, at least within the Ford community, it was just a huge, ridiculous, disruptive change, daunting risks, all that kind of stuff. And what he did is he's okay, we're going to go here. And let's assess our own readiness, for lack of a better term. Let's really come to grips with our current reality. And by the way, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I am not a car guy, right? I don't have experience here. You're going to figure this out. And what I'm going to do is help you and facilitate, that process moving forward. So we've had a tendency historically, I think, to look at leaders as, okay, they're the people with the answers. things are so complex now. It's not like that knowledge works its way down the hierarchy somehow. It really is, as quickly as you can, coming to grips with, the discomfort and the complexity and all those things, and saying, who's got an idea? Does that make sense? You're really using your position to sort of orchestrate leadership. And Brett, back to you. I remember something else, and I thought of Dave Ramsey when you said this. I really did. The guy that he has the show, and I don't listen to it every day or whatever, but he had a comment one time when I was driving home. He said something to the effect of, hey, if you want to be skinny, like, eat what skinny people eat. We can make it more complicated than that, but you just do that. And you said, as a very young officer, like you when you came into your first job in the Air Force, you took a look at the tenured pilots that everybody wanted to fly with. So in the meeting after the meeting and the people off to the side, the informal discussions, you really looked around and saw there were pilots that you wanted to be one of those guys one day. And then what you started doing is like eating what skinny people eat. You started to really pay attention to what they did and how they did it. And you asked them questions, and you were a student, if you will, of what was going on there. Is this stuff really that simple? Because it's like leadership's a tough thing, but it's common sense, not common practice. We know all that, but is it really as simple as those characteristics, those values? I want to be a leader. There's somebody that has that. I'm going to find out what they're doing. What do you?
I'll tell you the background of that story. Again, it goes back to my life as a fighter pilot. But when I told you that story, I was talking about my very first squadron commander. And so for people that don't really understand how things are organized, the basic unit of the Air Force is a squadron. And so a fighter squadron basically has, call it 24 airplanes, and you've got a commander, and you've got an ops officer, and you got, 35 people that probably should be in a motorcycle gang, but instead they're flying these airplanes. And I was so lucky. My first squadron commander was a guy named Joe Gorecki, and he was the squadron commander, right? This is the person that's he's on the pedestal. He's his word is law and everything else. And you wanted to fly with him, right? You wanted to be on the schedule with him because you knew, A, that he could probably kick your butt and you were going to learn something, that he was going to be prepared. He stayed current. He didn't rest on what he knew to be good stuff 10 years ago. You wanted to go fly with him. And I've got stories. I can still remember very specific sorties that I flew with him in 1983. I mean, that's the impression I have. But that, for example, that's one example of what I tried to carry through, that even though I wouldn't be a squadron commander for another 16 or 17 years after that, as a squadron commander, then the next level's ops group commander, and then it's wing commander. Up through the time, I was the commander of the largest Air Force combat wing in the Pacific. And one of the things that was always important to me was to stay credible in the mission, right? So that not only did I not want people to be embarrassed by me as their leader, but I wanted them to, want to emulate things I did. Now, that didn't mean I was as good as that captain that was flying 5 times a week, but it's and not no way am I comparing myself to Tom Brady. But one of the stories I heard about Tom Brady was, he says, it's clear he's not the same quarterback he was 10 years ago. But he is an even better leader than he was 10 years ago, right? That he stays good enough and credible enough at what he actually does. But it really is his ability to, self-awareness, self-assessment, humility. What am I still good at? What am I not as good at? And let me bring in the people that are good at this, right? You should cherish the fact that you're not the smartest one in the room or the most capable one in the room. But what you should really do is you should know how to bring out the best of all those people to bring the team forward. And so So those are some of the ways I thought about it. But, I think it may have been something you showed me a study, or I don't know if it was in the 4 Moments of Truth book or something, but it talked about like leadership training and education, that for all these seminars and all those things that you go to, that's probably 20 or 30% of what has been deemed to be effective leadership training, that the vast majority of it comes from on-the-job training. It comes from mentoring. It comes from coaching. It comes from observing. It comes from trying, implementing, failing, learning, getting better, seeing what works for you, right? Because it's different for everybody. But all of that is about watching and learning. And I guess the final thing I would say about that is, another things I like to say is, everybody can serve as an example, if only as a bad example. So I have as many notes about things I never wanted to do as a leader as the things I wanted to do. And so it's that observation over time.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. Like, you think of the best leader you've ever, in your life, now think of the worst leader, who taught you more about leadership? Because a lot of times in this vague environment we find ourselves in, really bad leaders, like enduring that experience, if nothing else, if you're disciplined about it, it can tell you, who you don't want to be and how you don't want to react, and all of those kinds of things. But you bring to mind a guy by the name of Anders Ericsson, who is famous in Malcolm Gladwell books for doing the research behind the chapter, 10,000 hours in Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers. Fundamental thing I learned from him was you have a tendency to think about great achievement and associate it with unique talent. It's just, nothing could be further from the truth, right? Great achievement is a function of work ethic and discipline and all those kinds of things. So who isn't talking about Tom Brady, today or yesterday? And Tiger Woods and Serena Williams, and a lot of times people that are sort of in the limelight like that. But boy, I'll tell you, you start peeling back the onion on what does Tom Brady's day look like today, and is he working out? What's he eating? There's a discipline that most people just can never get in touch with. That's what you have to do to get great. And I think the same thing, to me anyway, Sandy, be interested in your opinion. Like leadership's the same way. Alan Mulally is a student of leadership, right? He's on the board at Google. He led Ford. He led Boeing. He still thirsts for, what's Jim Young Kim. Dr. Kim was on our first LinkedIn Live session. He says, I've never felt as energized in my entire life as when I'm learning something, as when I'm diving into something, that I don't know. We had somebody chatted in. I couldn't get their name, but they chatted in. The whole idea with leaders in this environment is that they got to listen. They really got to listen, to what's taking place. But Sandy, in kind of with all of that as background, what are your thoughts about work ethic, leadership, natural talent, skill, learned it in a book? How do we become better leaders? What do we do?
Yeah, that's it's such a good question, and has so much nuance to it. But the thing that I would say, and Brett is a great example of this, is that what was it? Woody Allen, who said 80% of success in life is just showing up.
Just get there. Just get out there. Yeah.
Yeah. Just show up. And I think there's so much about leadership that is easy to say and hard to do. And because in the end, we talked about, taking people elsewhere. And if we choose to influence them, which Tom Brady obviously has decided to influence people, but he is influencing them, he's taking them elsewhere. And so in the end, what he does or doesn't do and the outcome he produces or doesn't produce will be judged. And my goodness, look at Patrick Mahomes, there's all kinds of things that are being said and so forth. And what he had quite a performance himself, just in persistence and and so on. But I think that if I've learned anything about it, it's and I take everything that Brett said about if you want to be skinny, eat what skinny people eat. By the way, that's easy to say, and that's hard to do. And there are so many things like that in leadership, because you have to choose. You have to actually make choices, and you have to be prepared to be judged based upon the choices you made. And then you have to live with those choices. And you also have to be ready to influence others. And I think that stuff takes real practice. And to your point, Sam, if you want to be elite at something, and you begin to think about what this 10,000 hours means to be able to master some of these things, this is about showing up every day, doing the work, choosing to not do things, and so on. And I think if you did look at a day in the life of, a week in the life of, a month in the life of Brett, and you looked at a day, a week, a month in the life of Tom Brady, and then you overlay that on your own life and say, I see what I'm accomplishing, I see what they accomplish. We might learn that the way that we're spending our time, because my friend Harry Kramer talks about that he's a math guy like me. His favorite number is 168. And what is 168? Well, it's 24/7. And so in any given week, there are only 168 hours. And there's no such thing as work-life balance. You have a life, and you have 168 hours every week that you can deploy, that you can use. And you have to live your life in that, part of which is work, part of which are other things. And there are things that you're going to have to choose to do and not do. And so, I love this. If you want to be skinny, eat what the skinny people eat. And then if you overlay your life on that, you're going to discover that maybe that person who is elite at what you would like to be elite at probably uses their 168 in a different way than you do. And, when Brett was talking about his squadron commander that he admired and looked up to, well, how is that person spending his 168 hours? I want to get me some of that.
Yeah.
Because I want to be that. And that's cool, and role model leadership is a great thing. In other words, be the change you want to become. And those kinds of things. So I think, Sam, you're hitting on, we're really getting kind of at the essence of some things that people could practically do. Think about your own 168. Could be a place to start.
Hey, Sam.
Yeah, go ahead, Brett.
Let me pick back up on this 10,000 hours thing. I think there's another aspect of this that one place I've learned this is in golf, and you may have learned it too, that you can spend 10,000 hours doing the wrong thing and not be any better at it, right? And I've seen leaders who spend a lot of hours doing the wrong thing, despite the feedback that they get, direct and indirect, that what they're doing is not working, right? And so the 10,000 hours only works if you're doing the right thing, which takes us back to, what we started with the disruption, all those things that Sandy talked about. As the environment changes, or as you experience in the Air Force, as you get more senior, you get put in charge of organizations where you have what I call domain knowledge of those things. And if you keep doing what you always did, what you can't do what you always did, it won't get where you always got, all those things, then you are not going to go forward, right? And that's when your ego, and that's when maybe your hubris gets in the way, and you stop being open to the feedback. And the more senior you get, the more you have to really fight for that feedback, right? If you're sitting at the head of the table and all the craniums are going north and south, there's a pretty good chance that environment is not such that you're getting the feedback you need to get better. So I always caution on that 10,000 hour thing, because there's a lot of things you can do for 10,000 hours, and all you're doing is reinforcing bad habits. So you got to get the right coaching, the right feedback, and be willing to change.
I think in a way what you're doing is you're describing my golf game versus your golf game, where I'm out there banging balls on the range and you have a plan. So feedback taken. I had a couple of chats come in here, and I think accentuating your point, Brett. It's not practice. It's perfect practice. It's the whole idea of really, you're receptive to the feedback. I don't know how many times, on the chat, the word humility has come up. And when you think about it, it's a very disarming thing for the person that is, air quotes, in charge, to come down, the hierarchy to whoever is, and just be a person and ask them questions and what's going on and what's happening. So the whole idea of listening and humility and all of these kinds of things, we hear it over and over and over again. And, to Sandy's point, I think, it's a time consuming thing to be a leader, right? It's maybe not for everybody. I mean, there was somebody, I think Douglas was his name, on the chat that said, leadership's kind of it's a calling. It's if you're really going to be a great leader, you've got to be willing to invest in yourself, self accountability. First off, you've got to be willing to invest in others to get them to a point where they trust you, right? And that takes work, and it takes more work, and with some it's less, but for the most part, trust is something that comes up in every leadership discussion, but you don't show up with it. You may bring some by reputation, but boy, that's an investment, and that's an investment each and every day. That's getting back to people, and that's finding out what's important to them, all those different kinds of things. When it gets down to individual sets of circumstances, somebody else on your leadership's a behavior. It is, eventually it becomes one. But leaders figure out in the moment, on the basis of a lot of the work that they've put in over time, what needs to be done. And, I work at the Center for Leadership Studies, where for 50 years we've been saying it depends. What's the best leadership style? Well, like they all work, they all don't, right? It really depends on the set of circumstances. But I really think, from my own personal standpoint, well, like, what did I get out of this book? Like, having the opportunity to interview all of these people. It's sort of a think, feel, do thing. Like leaders in their heads, there really is a thought process that they have. They take it seriously. It's a calling. They invest in it. They're consistently thinking and asking themselves questions and asking others questions that aren't being asked. Because of that, at least in part, they come across as approachable and humble, and they give credit when they get a good idea, and they listen and all that kind of stuff. And so they get people, they think about this whole thing of influence a certain way, and they get people to feel a certain way. They get people to trust them. So when they're asking a question, they're getting real data back. People aren't, we've all been in a set of circumstances where somebody in a position of power says, hey, what do you got in your mind? And you find yourself saying something very different than what you really have on your mind, because you can, self-protect very, very quickly. But then when it comes down to, okay, what do leaders do? Well, again, it depends. It sort of, but, Sandy, what do you think about that kind of encapsulation there of everything? This sort of think, feel, do. If you had to sort of put a stamp on, I think, what Lessons for Leaders talks about, and all of these different, very diverse leaders, and your experience, think, feel, do. It's like there's some real consistency, and then there's some real differences depending upon opportunity.
Yeah, I was, in listening to this, when you mentioned that it's behavior, and behavior is the doing part. So we're observing someone doing, and I was thinking, well, what's behind it? Because a lot of people, they don't necessarily do things that just annoy us to no end. And we've worked for people we consider good leaders and people we consider bad leaders. But I was thinking about something that Brett was saying in terms of, the 10,000 hours, and that, it's practice with supervision, or practice, that's how you really get better. And I've certainly experienced that in my own life. When I have a chance to observe someone and who is really good, and I go away and try it, and then I can observe and so on. Or if there's someone who's willing to coach me, mentor me, and all those things Brent was talking about earlier. But I think when people talk about, well, I have a boss, but she just doesn't listen, or he just doesn't listen, or even, my parents, they just don't listen. And I think that there's something behind not listening, which has to do with your think and feel. And that, I call it success disease. So success breeds arrogance, and arrogance causes us to stop listening. And we're not listening. We're not listening because we don't care. We're not listening because what you're talking about does not fit with the success grooves I have in my mind. And so, in people who want to get better at golf, maybe they're really good, but they're not going to get better as long as the arrogance creeps in. And once you stop listening, then you're in decline. You just don't know it, because now you've cut yourself off. And so I think the think, feel, do. I may be in the situation with someone and I get this overwhelming feeling that they're wrong. That's behind the behavior of not listening. I'm not going to listen because you're just wrong. Okay?
Yeah.
And you're wrong because my success model doesn't fit with what you're saying. And that's what makes it so insidious. What makes success disease so insidious, and you watch company after company and person after person, they lose their humility and they are in decline. They just don't know it. And so how do we keep our humility? And it's back to choices and judgment. I'm going to have to choose, and always being open to what's going on and having the courage to choose. These are hard things, and it's easy to say. I mean, big words, like judgment and so on, and courage. I mean, these are big words. They're easy to say, but they're hard to do. When there's someone there that you really care about, for example, and you can watch them going in the wrong direction, and they won't listen. Or I've made these mistakes myself. And it's this stuff is that's what makes it so challenging and fun and interesting, is if I can find my humility and keep it and stay open. As the faster the world moves, the more relevant I can be and stay.
Yeah. Well,
I was going to say, to me, it's that never discount the possibility that somebody besides you has a good idea, right? And I like that. I mean, this always worked for me in the past. Why isn't it working now? Well, because you haven't recognized it's a change in situation. There's something that's disruptive. There's something different. The other thing, Sam, not to hijack this, but there's a point Sandy made earlier. I'd really be curious to hear either or both of you maybe talk a little bit about. It goes back to, Sandy brought this up, and you see this over and over in the chat about how our country needs good leadership. Our country needs good leadership. And then I go to the other point Sandy made about values, right? And I start to think about how much are common values between the leader and the followers. How much is that alignment necessary? Because I would argue there's a ton of leadership in this country right now, but it influences people with different values. And I don't want to make it a political thing. So let's just say whether you're in column A or column B, you can find what you would consider to be good leaders, right? So I think we almost simplify it or oversimplify it by saying the country needs good leaders. It's almost to me that we need followers who have a common set of values, and then they will identify leaders who will take them in the direction that they want to go. You know, I'm not smart enough to have this all figured out, but there's something about just saying we need good leaders, and that's too simple, because again, regardless of what you think is good or bad in terms of direction the country is going or isn't going, you can find good leaders, or not maybe gotten good, you can find effective leaders across the spectrum. The question is, if they're not aligned to your values, do you look at them as a bad leader? See what I'm saying?
Yeah. Sandy, you got a comment on that, or?
Yeah, I'll tell you, Brett, that's such an important thing that you're on there, which is, I think, another one of these big words is alignment. And you know, I see it in the business world a lot. So when I was working at Unilever, we are in the business of producing consumer products and we were trying to just make a small difference in people's lives, make their lives just a little bit better every day by producing a nice soap, a nice shampoo, Ben & Jerry's ice cream, you know, Hellman's mayonnaise. Wait, nothing better than a sandwich with Hellman's mayonnaise. You know what I mean? Just make your life a little bit better every day. And by the way, that's not what skinny people eat, but that's just a parenthetical. But, you know, we were trying to make people's lives a little bit better every day. And we produced trash for a living, because every one of those consumer products had a package which was being discarded somewhere. So we felt that in order for us to get ourselves in alignment with the world, that we had to earn the right to grow our business. And the way we earned the right to grow our business was we were going to grow our business, but we were going to reduce our impact on the environment at the same time. So we felt that we had to do well and we had to do good, because we knew that we were going to be judged. We knew that we were going to be judged. We were being judged based on that. And so I think that, you know, back to this notion of taking people elsewhere, that where we take them matters, and it has to be aligned with value and values. And you know, in my mind, it's almost one word now, value, and put a parentheses around the S. Values is value plus value, value plus values. You know, it's one thing, because they go together, doing well and doing good. It's not or do good. You know, we can't destroy things while we're, you know, while we're trying to achieve something. And so how do we, and alignment is at the essence of that, you know, and aligning people with value and values. And you see people, they get off, and we have all these examples in history of leaders by any measure, they were taking people elsewhere, but the values were upside down, you know. And you know, back to the Super Bowl, I just loved the Jeep commercial with Bruce Springsteen, where, you know, he called it the reunited States of America. You know, I mean, that's alignment. You know, that's seeking alignment. Can we come back together on where we want to go with this thing. And I think that's why this stuff is so hard. It's so easy to say and so hard to do, because when you think about taking people with you, that's one thing, that in creating alignment, but then elsewhere and the judgment that is going to come from that choice, we have to be prepared to be judged as a leader also, because we chose to lead. So I don't know, Brett, and that was a bit of a muddled mess that I just said.
No, it's
but
good.
I think you're on to,
Yeah.
Right. And so I would say the question then becomes, let's say that, because I'm passionate about this thing you're bringing up, and again, to me, it's not political. It's about this getting a country that is not constantly divided 51 to 49, or even worse, 50.1 to, what's the rest of that, Sam? 49.9, something like that. Yeah. So do we need leaders? I mean, is the first function of I think about this. When are we going to have a leader in this country that we're willing to go out and get the marble and build another huge monument in Washington, D.C. to? When is that going to happen? And is that the leader that is going to be able to get more than 50% of us aligned on a common set of values, right? And one of the things I've heard critiques over time, especially as we've been involved with this the wars since 9/11, et cetera, is that people will delineate the difference between what in a lot of countries, not a lot of countries, but enough countries where you see a tribal allegiance, if you will, or a family allegiance takes priority over a national allegiance, right? And so I've read some things recently that talk about, the United States, as we get more and more separated, then the allegiance starts to go to something other than national values, let's call it that. And so how do we get ourselves aligned around a core set of national values that no matter, what else is going on, at the end of the day, when it comes, push comes to shove, whatever your analogy is, that we have a leader that can align us, to whatever those basic values are that most of us would find in common. And so maybe that's the leader we're looking for, is the one who can set values, get people aligned to them, and then influence them to that elsewhere, because where we are now is not good. I like your elsewhere.
Yeah.
Well, I will say, I'm sorry, Shane, do you have something?
No, I was just going to make one small comment, Sam.
Go ahead.
I think we're looking for ways, Brett, to give people stuff. And what people need is dignity. Because when I don't have a job and I'm not connected or I'm underemployed, or I'm this or that, we've got to, and I think this was one of the things that our previous, the previous leaders that are in the marble, they understood that human dignity is at the essence of this. So we've got to find a way. And I know we will, but we've got to find a way, because I'm with you. This 51, 49 and all this stuff, we all know it's not right. But we've got to do something.
Well, and I'll tell you too, when you say we've got to do something, and I know both of you have lived your lives this way, it's not like you have to wait for someone else to do it. You take that discomfort in your own realm, and what you do is you make it happen. You initiate. How did people get into this book, right? 15 different people, different walks of lives. Well, they did it by doing that, by taking those risks, by looking at those risks in the face and saying, I'm going to try to do something special here. And as you were talking, Brett, I just kept, we couldn't get him this month because it's Black History Month. But one of the chapters in there, I don't know if either of you read it, on Daryl Davis, and his work in civil rights. And, it started as a 10-year-old where he was the flag bearer as a Cub Scout walking down the street with an all-white Cub Scout troop. And people were screaming things and throwing rocks in his all of his brethren, Cub Scouts, were sort of forming a human shield over him. And he had his first talk in 1965 with his father about racism. And his question at 10 years old was, wait a minute. Like, how can these people hate me when they don't even know me? And that fueled, from the age of 10, when you talk about like diving into a problem and investing, he's read everything there could ever have been published on racism in general and the KKK in particular. And he is a man that actually has been given credit for having up to 70 people that were card-carrying members of the KKK not only quit the organization, but provide him with a robe when they did it. He's actually shown up as an African-American to KKK rallies just to create that dissonance. So there are a number of things, high risk, that all of us can do. I cannot tell you how much I have enjoyed, like, just listening to both of you. I hope everyone else did as well. And I want to thank everybody else once again before I kick it back over to Susie for saying, appreciate you giving us this hour. So Susie, back to you, hopefully right on time. You're muted.
Sorry about that. We can't thank you enough, Sandy, Brett, Sam, for having this conversation. So much ground was covered, not only from lessons from leaders and some of the stories told in that book, but topical events that are going on right now, from the Super Bowl to politics. So just really appreciate that you all had this conversation with us. And if you're interested in learning more about lessons from leaders and the 15 stories from the remarkable leaders that shared, please visit lessonsfromleadersbook.com. Thank you again.
Appreciate it, everybody.
This book will give you a wide array of really interesting, thoughtful, and practical ideas from some incredibly wise people.
It provides such a rich variety of leadership journeys from so many great leaders with different backgrounds, experiences, and areas of focus and service.
I think you're going to find this entertaining, it's going to be practical, and it's lessons from leaders that you can take back and use.
Pick up a copy of Lessons from Leaders.